Welcome, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us at our very first podcast. I am your host, Mihnea Cătuți from EPG, and I am joined today by my colleague, Mihai Bălan, who is the head of energy systems here at EPG, and he is also the executive director of the Romanian Photovoltaic Industry Association. Thank you very much for joining me, Mihai.
Thank you, Mihnea. It's an honor being here to open up this series.
Yes, what a fantastic opportunity to start this conversation amongst ourselves. So as always, we're trying to keep focus on a report or a publication that has been more recent. And today we're going to focus on barriers to renewable energy. We are speaking in the context when the European Commission has already outlined its entire plan, REPower EU, and what needs to be done to reduce the consumption and the need for imports of hydrocarbons from the Russian Federation. The plans involve increasing the renewable target from 40 to 45% compared to what we've already seen introduced for the Fit for 55 package. The Commission proposes a doubling of the installations of PV by 2025 compared to the current ambitions that are being discussed between the Brussels institutions. And in total, I think the goal is to install 600 gigawatts of PVs by 2030. The Commission comes with a series of proposals also about permitting, about creating the so-called go-to areas that have lesser needs for permitting and for obtaining the usual red tape paperwork that's been taking so much time in many EU countries. And in a nutshell, the plan is about how to accelerate the ramp-up of renewable energy sources within the EU within the next few years to contribute not only to climate change mitigation but also to the energy security goals of the EU. Within this context, it's a fantastic time to discuss a report published by Eclaron this year. They have an entire project which monitors barriers to renewable energies. And they have some very interesting findings, quite a few differences between Romania and other EU member states that they have analyzed. And it would be great to discuss today some of their findings, but also some of your experience with the barriers that are faced today by developers of renewable projects. Interestingly, the index that Eclaron has created places Romania as the fifth worst country in the EU for developing renewable projects. What makes it even more interesting is that, as opposed to the usual administrative burden for obtaining permitting and for environmental permits and so on, in Romania it seems that the largest barriers are more associated with political and economic barriers that have to do with consistency and reliability of the legislative framework, the strategies that are in place, also access to finance, the lack of PPAs, at least no PPAs having been introduced so far in Romania until now. So for this episode, I thought it would be good to sort of walk through the main barriers they have identified and discuss the experience from Romania. And if we can also try to delve in a bit the sort of solutions that would be available for this, that would also be fantastic. So Mihai, just as I'm sure you've seen this project in the report, what's your general take of what they have done here?
I have indeed read it, and I must say it's been a good read because it takes you through the whole journey of developing solar and wind in Romania, and I must say that we're transitioning from probably one of the worst countries in Europe in terms of developing renewables with absolutely no new megawatts installed in the last 7 years to one of the hottest markets today, when we're seeing a lot of interest and also from foreign developers, but also from national developers. The Romanian energy market, renewable energy market, is among the hottest, not only in the region but also in Europe, based on some advancements that have been made in the last several months. And it's good to actually see from the date the report was published what has changed and how this influences, the interest of the investors looking at the Romanian renewable market today.
So you're basically saying that the sort of fifth worst ranking may already not be the same as it was a few months ago, actually last year when the study was conducted.
I can certainly say that Romania is not among the top 5 worst countries in Europe in terms of renewable development potential. It's actually probably in the top 3 today, based not only on what has already been improved, but also on what's coming, based on the news we've seen from the governmental side, and also from Brussels in terms of financing and development opportunities.
But how much do you think of this has been externally driven rather than internally? So has it been just the authorities suddenly addressing all the barriers that we've had to date, or is there something else?
I think it's important to understand the current context in which we're discussing the development of renewables in Romania, and we cannot really avoid the elephant in the room and what's happening in Ukraine, and the need for all European countries to wean off Russian gas and to rely a lot more on renewable energy sooner rather than later, and also in terms of energy security, not only in terms of climate change. So there's this, and very connected to this is the fact that we are seeing huge energy prices today in all European markets. Romania makes no exception, but one of the things that's particular to Romania today is that in the last 2 or 3 years, Romania has become a net electricity importer, shifting from a net electricity exporter in the region. So there's a huge demand for electricity, a demand that's only going to get even bigger in the upcoming years with the entire trend of electrification that we will be seeing.
Okay, but yeah, I mean, that's interesting because we have all these assets that are slowly reaching the end of their lifetime, and not much has happened since 2012 in the realm of renewables, at least in Romania. And perhaps now it might be a good time to sort of delve in a bit more in some of the details that are provided in this report that we're discussing today, and to try to understand what has changed and what still remains to be done. So, as I was saying earlier, Eclarion has identified the political and economic framework as sort of the main. This is where Romania scored the worst, and this has to do with the existence of strategies, in the field of energy and climate in general, with the support schemes that are in place, the level of remuneration that the developers of renewable projects are receiving, and also the sort of stability of the legislative system in general. So let's take them in turn. What about strategies? Has anything changed in the last few years?
Coming back to your previous question, yes, this is absolutely externally driven because of the need to have national energy and climate plans. Romania finally has something that is even better than an energy strategy. It has a plan for the next 10 years or so that includes clear capacities, clear targets that must be met, and clear instruments that have to be put in place. It's a good plan for investors to base their decisions onto. It provides what is the holy grail of renewable energy, long-term visibility, and that's great. And we can actually say that as soon as the National Energy and Climate Plan was published, even though it's not as ambitious as many would have wanted, and as Romania can actually deliver, on the renewable energy potential, it still is a plan. And this creates interest among the investors. So yes, in terms of strategies, we need to go even further than that. We have to update the National Energy and Climate Plan with a new plan that's going to take into account the new European ambitions, all that also account for weaning off Russian gas, I must say. And here is where we are still lacking a bit. In terms of administrative capacity of developing these plans and developing them in a very close dialogue with the investors in renewable energy, and not only in this field, but coming back to the risk and the thing that the political risk has always been considered the most important in the field of renewables. Well, in Romania, it was a political decision that basically put the entire renewable ecosystem to a halt in 2015, and it still is considered, the biggest risk today. Even though we're seeing public declarations of the highest level officials of the Romanian state that Romania will rely on renewables as well as nuclear and natural gas to move forward in this energy transition.
Absolutely. Of course, yeah, with the interplay of all these energy sources, perhaps a topic for a different discussion, not to get into the, because immediately, my brain flashed of having to say a few things about nuclear and about gas. But no, I think you're definitely right in terms of the fact that now there is some long-term visibility that has been lacking. I would argue that while the targets are the most important, that show the direction in which the entire energy system will move, I think the National Recovery and Resilience plans as well came at least with some of the financial firepower that the NECP lacks. So there's a lot of cash infusion through this as well, which brings me to support schemes. So what hasn't worked in the past, and why is the outlook better now? Because right now Romania doesn't have any support scheme in place for new renewable installations. Of course, we know this may change, but I'm sure you have more details on this than I do.
Well, Romania, through the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, has an open call for renewable energy projects that brings 450 million euros, I think, for at least 900 megawatts of both solar and wind, which is basically the first support instrument that the renewable sector in Romania has since 2017. And we're seeing a lot of interest in the market for this instrument. Besides the National Recovery and Resilience Plan, Romania is the second biggest beneficiary of the Modernization Fund. And that brings roughly 16 billion euros to the energy sector in Romania in the next 8 or 9 years.
But how do these... how did the previous support scheme work? Why didn't it work? And what's being done now? Because I think it's time to also speak not just about the availability of money, but also about how this money is spent.
Yes, indeed. I think, during the first wave of investments in the Romanian renewable sector, there wasn't a lot of experience in this field. There wasn't a lot of experience in how to implement the support scheme back when the technology very much needed it. During the first wave of investments, wind and solar were the most expensive energy generation technologies. Now they are the cheapest. So, of course, a different way of looking at the support schemes and support instruments is required. And we really think that the Romanian state also gained a lot more experience and knowledge in how to implement.
But then I dare ask, you mentioned already cheapest form of producing electricity. Why is there still a need for subsidizing or providing any support scheme whatsoever for renewable energy?
This is a very important discussion. It might not be a support scheme might not be needed in most of the cases, but what the investors are actually looking after these days is confidence that they will recover their investment. And we must say that confidence in this world today, at least in the energy sector, is a bit missing. And while we have a look at the energy prices today, and they really create a solid business case for basically any investment in renewable energy, this type of investments is capex heavy, and it's an investment that will pay off in 10, 12, 15, or maybe 20 years. So the investors must have at least some sort of revenue stabilization mechanism, such as a CFD, which I'm sure we will get to that point later, in order to mitigate the risk, the political risk, the financing costs, which are very high in Romania, and also the huge level of uncertainty on this market. The prices are very high today, but we're seeing talks about capping the prices once again, and then what happens? So you need to really bring a high level of confidence for the investors, and they will respond.
All right, so basically, as you said, that the strategy on one hand provides certainty about the overall direction of the energy system, while schemes are needed for de-risking and providing certainty to actual investors, to actual projects.
That's the key word, de-risking investments in renewable energy.
All right, so if it's not necessarily about the need for financing, but more about just ensuring perhaps a steady supply of cash, and also making sure that, as you said, the investment can make a return on its initial investment in the long term. we've had this discussion for probably a decade now in Romania about contracts for difference. You mentioned it earlier. So where are we now with contracts for difference, and how do they interplay with the support schemes that you mentioned from the Modernization Fund and the National Recovery and Resilience Plan?
We've been hearing some great news from the Ministry of Energy recently that CFDs are coming to the Romanian market next year. And I will not go into the details, but it seems that there is a huge capacity that will be financed or supported through CFDs in the renewable energy sector, dedicated mostly to larger projects. And it seems that the modernization fund will be used to actually help implement the CFD scheme and finance the counterpart.
Yeah, but that's the smart way to put it, right? Because it helps you with public support as well. Because when you think of renewables and you think of investment costs, it's politically always problematic to know that it will end up in the bills of the consumer. So making use of the modernization fund in this way could be actually the smart way to go.
Absolutely, because then any additional money that would be needed, for in some periods of time. Would not actually go to the consumer's bill and will be covered, from the money in the modernization fund.
All right. So the biggest barrier identified in the Clarion report, which is the political and economic framework, has been to some extent at least solved. So we have a strategy, we have new support schemes coming in. So this has in part at least been addressed.
Partly indeed, but there's still a lot of work to do, and I think one of the main goals of the Romanian authorities and the Romanian renewable sector together is to actually create a healthy market, healthy long-term market. I mean, in which not to overcompensate or undercompensate and not distort the market in any way. Create a healthy investment framework that would actually ensure healthy transition for the Romanian energy sector to 2030 and beyond, because nothing stops in 2030. We still need to reach net zero by 2050.
I mean, honestly, it's quite amazing to hear from someone who's so deeply involved with developing renewable projects and promoting this in Romania that the government actually needs to make sure that they also don't both overpay the projects, because this leads to distortions of the market. If one project is overcompensated, its behavior then in the market can be problematic.
What we actually want to avoid in the Romanian renewable sector actually is to speak about a second wave of investments. We don't want a second wave of investments. We need a constant stream of investments over the next 30 years and even further in order to have a healthy energy market.
Yeah, I mean, I think that makes perfect sense. And I guess there's still some risks that we've seen, at least with the projects that have been approved so far for the Modernization Fund, that both their selection process has been anything but transparent, and also the way they give money to actual projects has been relatively problematic.
Transparency and competition are the key words for making this a success story.
Well, of course, yeah, and especially if we speak of a double-sided contracts for difference, then I guess it makes more sense, to try to reduce the price that the strike price that has to be signed between the two parts as low as possible, which makes the burden on the state side easier to digest.
Absolutely, but this requires a lot of administrative capacity from the state.
Okay, this brings me to markets, which is the second main barrier identified in the report. What can you tell us here about, first of all, how the electricity market, the wholesale electricity market in Romania functions, and how it affects this potential for increasing the deployment of renewable energy? And also, I always want to get back to PPAs because, as we know, power purchase agreements have been banned in Romania for a long time. But now with the implementation of EU legislation, legally this has changed, yet we have not seen anything moving. But let's start with the market.
We've seen some PPAs being signed, and there's a lot of PPAs being discussed in the market, but the current energy prices make it very hard to settle a PPA these days. Nobody wants to take the risk, and there's also, coming back to the energy markets, there's also the question regarding the balancing cost. The Romanian balancing market is a problem that needs to be addressed in order to make PPAs a lot more attractive. At the moment, it is a very concentrated market, And between the two sides signing a PPA, nobody wants to take the risk of the Romanian balancing market. Before the energy price crisis, at least for wind, the costs for balancing were the highest in Europe, according to a Wind Europe report. And this hasn't really been addressed yet. We don't see a lot of storage being deployed in Romania, although there's plans both in the Modernization Fund and in the National Recovery and Resilience Plan. There's also plans for demand side management, which is also very much needed, but also for hybrid power plants that would at least in part address this issue. But indeed, the wholesale energy market today is a problem, but it also creates opportunities because the very high prices, basically, as I was saying before, make any investment in renewable energy a no-brainer today. And the problem is that there's a lot of concentration on the day-ahead market in Romania. 60 to 70% of the energy that's being traded is traded on the day-ahead market, while a healthy market would mean that this percentage would go down to 20 to 25 at most. And we've seen some intentions from the Romanian Ministry of Energy to actually shift the day-ahead market to a long-term market. But maybe the CFD will be a good instrument for this, because as it is today, with support for capex in renewable capacities, this will not help. But it is indeed a key step, for a healthy energy market in general.
I agree with this. I mean, feel free to challenge me on this, but I'm still somewhat scared about how this will actually happen in practice, because I know we've seen, for example, calculations done even without any support scheme that renewable investments today in PVs and offshore wind, if they sell electricity just on the wholesale markets, on the day-ahead market, they can recover their investment costs in maximum 5 years, which has never happened in the past. Now you may get some additional support coming from the state as well. So the basic idea of producing cheap renewable electricity is to make sure that electricity suppliers have access to that, and also that you ensure that industry has access to cheap electricity. So that's kind of like my concern right now, which is how do you get those developers of projects to sell their electricity through PPAs rather than staying on the day-ahead market, which makes more sense financially for them right now, but doesn't provide that access to cheap electricity that I was mentioning earlier.
So less capex support, more operational support would be the clear answer, and we're heading that way with more capacity that is going to be auctioned through contracts for difference. But there's also a need for a lot more dialogue between all the stakeholders in the market, getting to talk, getting to find what's the best business case for both of them, and this will probably lead to more PPAs being signed, because there is a demand for PPAs, and there's also a demand for corporate PPAs, which we're seeing from the industry today. Other than that, I think it's only natural that the market will go in that direction, because more renewables means lower costs. And PPAs also are key, for avoiding situations in which, for example, you get cannibalization of the market, especially if you develop a lot of solar that will probably sometimes reach negative prices. So CFDs and PPAs are really instrumental to reaching that point in which we shift away from the day-ahead market to more and more energy on the long-term markets.
No, I agree completely, but I think that's a priority which I still want to see the national authorities take into consideration properly, because I feel like the risks associated with maintaining a high share of electricity volumes being sold on wholesale markets is not taken into account sufficiently. But let's move to some of the other barriers identified in the report. First of them being grids. The grid infrastructure there exists. And here, I dare say I disagree with the report, because it places Romania at the sort of medium risk in terms of what's happening with the grid operator and grid development projects. What do you think?
Well, Romania probably scores relatively decent in this part of the report, because we're seeing some improvements from the TSO in terms of transparency, in terms of opening up the information. We actually now have a map on the website of the TSO showing how much capacity is available in different parts of the country. On the other hand, I must say for sure that grids are the main bottleneck for renewable developments in Romania. and it's not going to change anytime soon because, as everybody is aware, grid investments are massively complicated, and it takes a lot of time, it takes a lot of effort to make them happen. And maybe one of the solutions would actually the biggest problem with grid development in Romania is not the investment that's needed. For that the money is there, both in the modernization fund and in other financing sources. And there's also, it seems that there is at least declaratively a political will to move forward with the grids, and there's also a lot of highly competent people working for the TSO, but there's a lot of administrative challenges that need to be overcome for them. For example, land use and cutting some part of forest and going to protected areas, which must be done carefully, but in the same time it must be done quickly enough so to support the expansion of renewables. And maybe one idea that we'd very much like to discuss with the authorities, as we are going to have go-to zones for renewable developments, maybe we should expand these go-to zones for grid developments, because it makes no sense to develop renewables without expanding the grid. However, there's also other solutions that might be that should actually be taken into account by the TSO and also by the distribution grid operators. Implementing new technologies, having a look at smart ways of evacuating energy from certain areas, because if you only rely on building new lines, which is essential, but it will take a lot of time, we won't get there in time for the 2030 targets.
So you need some intermediate measures as well, but I guess it still remains a big vulnerability right now, but that's the same as everywhere in Europe. Which brings me to the final barrier discussed in the report, where Romania scores surprisingly okay compared to other European countries, which is administrative process, permitting, and so on, which is surprising, because bureaucracy is always a problem here at national level, but it seems that is different compared to countries like Germany or France or so on. So how come? How come this is one thing where things seem to be moving quicker here than in Western Europe?
Bureaucracy is still a problem, I must say, in Romania, and the level of digitalization of all the operations is also a challenge that needs to be overcome. However, today Romania has the shortest permitting time for solar in Europe, 1 to 1.5 years, and probably also the shortest time for onshore wind in Europe, 1.5 to 2 years, compared to countries like France or Germany, where it might take anywhere between 4 and 7 years. This is quite a big advantage for Romania today, and we're seeing this from all the investors that are looking to invest now. They have projects all across Europe, but they're saying, the time to market in Romania is the best advantage of the country in attracting investments now, when the country needs a lot of clean and cheap electricity.
All right, so we'll mark that as something that's going well, that doesn't need to necessarily change that much, except for digitalization perhaps of the process. One last thing, which I know it's something close to your heart, which is workforce. What's happening right now? Is there sufficient workforce and skills available at national level for developing such projects? And what's being done to address this?
Well, workforce is one of the two major challenges that we're seeing for the development of the renewable sector in Romania in the upcoming years. So, as in every other sector, there's a shortage of skilled workers in the solar and wind sector as well. However, Romania is doing something. It has 2 actual academies training people, including coal miners, to become wind and solar technicians. But the level of investments that's foreseen for Romania will still, at the level of investments we're seeing for Romania, there will be still a shortage of skilled workers, especially in the solar sector. And as all the other countries surrounding Romania in Europe will ramp up their installations, this problem is going to get even bigger, and there's basically no potential for importing, and we don't really want to import workforce from other countries for this. So a huge accent has to be put in the upcoming months or so on educating and training new people. The second barrier is actually the availability of solar panels, particularly, and we're seeing delays in some projects because the supply chain from China has been broken. The prices have increased a bit. This is not really problematic in terms of prices, but in terms of time, to get here, it's becoming problematic because, for example, if we're missing several months, we might be missing several months of sun in the solar sector. If we're missing the best months of a year, we're missing, on the business case.
Yeah, but the National Recovery and Resilience Plan says that there is a need to sort of try to attract this value chain domestically as much as possible. As executive director of RPIA, are you seeing any movement in this area?
We're actively encouraging it, and we're seeing a lot of movement here. And it's not only the national authorities that are willing to implement this. There's also a huge European call for reshoring the manufacturing industry, and it's also taken over North America at the moment. And I think it's key to actually not replace the dependency on Russian fossil gas with the dependency on solar panels from China. Of course, most of the solar panels will continue to come from China, but a bigger share of the market must be captured by Europe. And with the latest announcement that we're seeing, from factories in Italy and in France, we are expecting some sort of announcements of factories in Romania in the upcoming years, which would be a very good signal to just about everybody, and particularly for the renewable industry in this region.
Mihai, I must say, it feels odd to have so much positive news in a discussion on renewables in Romania, especially from the baseline we started, which is the 5th worst place to develop renewable projects when this study that we discussed today has been done.
A lot has changed in the last year, and I must say it feels odd indeed. Last year, if we had this discussion last year or 2 years ago, things wouldn't have looked as good, but we're pretty glad that things have improved, and there's still room for improvement. And as I told you, it's key to actually work together, all the stakeholders involved, for a healthy market.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for delving with me today into those barriers from the Clarion report I mentioned. This will be posted as a link to this video, so if people want to access it and see what it's about. It's interesting. I think it's important to also watch the podcast with it, because we've discussed all the changes that have happened since. Mihai Bălan, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.